Hello mates. I find it that in video games, all audio, visuals, gameplay, progression and lore can play a vital role. Dead by Daylight nails many of these things, but the way that lore is implemented to the game captivates me in a genuinely unique way. I constantly find myself flipping through the background tabs of the characters, and each and every time what I read wows itself directly to the character next to it, giving it personality and depth, new reasons to feel for it, empathy for survivors, and new levels of hideousness for the killers. All of this comes out so strong because it's tied directly to one of the main elements of the game: immersion, making you feel the terror by just barely evading the killer or sensing the growing bloodlust when you come so close to catching a survivor. It's all the more real when you know that your character has a story backing them up. And before anyone asks, does my playtime show in my skill? No. In my school grades, yes. With that said, hopefully I've given fine reasons for my opinion. Please do leave yours on mine, and let's dive deep into where this all began. Let's take a deeper look at the man behind the mask. The Miserable Smiling Killer by Benedict Baker chuckles in the early years of development, even from the Macmillan family bloodline, became the Trapper, the ultimate one at that, the ruthless pitfall of gore and agony in the trials. The latter defines him wherever his tall hulk of a figure appears. The first thing you will spot are a dozen incising metal rods penetrating through a bulging mass of pale bronze flesh, with violent slashes cutting back and forth his chest. One can only imagine what kind of agony he has to be going through by each and every passing stride he takes towards his prey. This man should be crawling on the ground, dying, broken. Yet, as he closes up on you, the agitation behind this sadistically grim mask, almost as if it knew what is about to happen, only makes his strides grow denser, and his brutal strength, awaked in the thrill of the chase, makes him shred through all the obstacles between you and him. His bone-made cruel crown spreads unnerving presence anywhere it stares. The presence in itself instills great fear. The smell of his prey sweating more anxious by the moment can be felt in the air as their actions begin to crumble under the closing pressure. No one knows it, or at least hasn't lived to tell a tale. But this thing was once a man. God hope that he won't come after you when you learn the truth. Even Macmillan idolized his father. It wasn't just that he was heir to a great fortune, it was the way he ran the estate. Raised under his firm hand, even had taken to running the workforce with iron hand. Production was always high, and the Macmillan estate prospered under father and son. As Archie Macmillan's mental health slowly disintegrated, even protected him from the herd who wanted a piece of the fortune. No matter what his father asked of him, even would do. When Archie Macmillan finally snapped, Even became his enforcer in what would become known as the worst mass murder in modern history. They never proved that Even led over 100 men into those dark tunnels before detonating the explosives and seemed to fate. The tale of the Macmillan estate is a tale of wealth and power gone very wrong. How many victims fell to the hands of father and son is unknown. No record is ever made of what became of Even Macmillan. His father is another unsolved puzzle, found trapped in the locked basement of his own warehouse, starved and abandoned. Even's beast-like physique was hardened by these very years of ruling over Macmillan Estate's poor workforce by questionable methods, likely somewhere in the early 19th century Northeast America, based on that the mysterious, though often on-spot, Benedict Baker writes of even for the first time as the Trapper in 1896. There is a vast monster of a man with a hideous grin torn across the mask that keeps stalking my every move. Similar to a hunter, he tracks us, priming devastating traps amongst the greenery. Extreme vigilance and a light step is essential in avoiding the blood-curdling clench of a bear trap, or the clutches of what I've taken to calling the miserable smiling killer. I have but many times managed to get caught in one of these traps. I have nothing but a fear for the feeling of blunt trap spikes grinding against my bones, or for the heavy and deliberate footsteps which always, inevitably, reveal a plastered, sadistic grin. The traps and the trapper, it has so far been a constant battle between looking up and looking down. Benedict Baker's journal, November 1896, on the Trapper. Also, it cannot have been much earlier, as Evans's mass murder was designated as the worst in modern history. At this time, the country was waging war against Great Britain for independence, which is ironic in a way that the Macmillans likely immigrated from the British Islands themselves, my guess being Scotland, judging from their last name Macmillan, Mac being a common last name part, or Cs, standing for the son of. Macmillan's production was centered around mining. In the game files, the Macmillan estate realm, consisting of 5 maps, is being referred to under the name Industrial, not to count in the obvious factor, the same industrial look throughout these 5 maps. And just so you know, realms are essentially arenas of the entity, each one having played a stage for a horrific event in the past, now being recreated in the entity's twisted imagination. Some of them house up to 5 maps, some consist of just 1. Realms are a wickedly complicated concept, and we will not even begin with different subrealms and their recurring locations. This topic deserves its own video. For now, all you need to know is that they make their own rich contributions to the lore if one is ready to look deep enough. The Macmillan estate was once the envy of even the most well-pampered families. Now, it's only an ominous lot with nothing more than horrid memories of mercilessness in its purest form. The foundry and the mine were the heart and center of the estate. Those unlucky enough to be employed by even Macmillan after he assumed his father's work slowly started to slip away from all kinds of normal life. Wives asking for their husbands to come back. Work hours got longer, sometimes breaching day to day, and pay was ever decreasing. Evan's iron hand and strict rules got tighter the longer he was in control. One afternoon, a large mining force was forbidden to leave and instructed to meet inside one of the deepest and unstable mine shafts instead. Objections were rewarded with a visit to the furnace. Questions and rumors arose in town, but no answers. One less worker, missed by maybe a poor widow, wasn't enough for real actions. Finally, even Macmillan had snapped, and he sealed his workers in the mine, suffocating those who weren't crushed by the initial blast of explosives. Archie Macmillan's starved remains were later found, a silent skeleton with a taunting man-made grin upon his meatless skull. What's left of the estate are now but mere ruins and myths. Teens enter the area for time to time in a game of dare, bringing back new information about what's happening in the estate. Because somehow, things are moving. Leftover machinery keeps starting up. The gas gog on the generators keeps decreasing. These are the 5 maps which make up the above-mentioned realm of Macmillans. 1. the coal tower. Once used for storing the coal that filled the foundry, it now lies abandoned, the roof split wide open, suggesting some titanic explosion, but the angles don't seem to make sense. So, to fathom its destiny is not done easily, even if one would want to. 2. The groaning storehouse. On the eastern edge of the estate, near the woods, lie the remains of the Macmillan's warehouse. The iron ingots housed within were the final products to come out of the smelting vats before the workers themselves were fed to the fires. Dwarfing the surrounding buildings, the massive storehouse can often be heard creaking and groaning as if it were crying out with the anguish of the incinerated laborers. 3. The ironworks of misery. The beating heart of the mine. The foundry was where the iron ore was directly smelted into vast ingots. The huge vats still bear evidence of the bodies that were incinerated within them, preserved in the metal residue. The Macmillan foundry was consigned to the scrap heap and its horrors forgotten as time passed and the buildings fell into ruin. 4. The shelter woods. The woods surrounding the estate might be the only witnesses to what really happened here. Trees with a certain deformed character, as if what they saw made them want to run away. The wood seldom gets any visitors, as even animals seem to avoid it if possible. 5. The suffocation pit. You can still see the tiny entrance that miners used to haul the ore to the surface. Now it is nothing more than a pile of rubble. No one bothered to clear it, as they feared whatever might be found inside. Instead, it fell into oblivion. Even as these provide some great insight to what really went on in the Macmillan estate, there still exists an obscurity in the lore regarding to how Archie Macmillan died and what was Evan's transition from being an enforcer of his father to being one of the entities like. This is a topic with great many different deductions, but the three main takes go as follows. 1. Archie Macmillan died even after Evan's best efforts. In this case, reasons to his death could be self-inflicted injuries or a couple of mutinous workers who had caught wind of the murders of their colleagues and decided to take action. In this case, Evan was left wandering, stranded and empty, without anyone to give his life a meaning anymore. Eventually, the entity reached out to him to fulfill the empty space of a master that his father had left, likely tempting him with promises of revenge. However, the entity had miscalculated. Evan was not just another madman, willing to do one's terrible biddings. He did what he was told by his father because he looked up to him. Evan fought back the entity, who insisted on taking his father's place as his new master, and through God knows how many ages of torture and agony, even Macmillan was eventually subdued. The second take goes as follows. Archie Macmillan died by the hand of his son. Evan was either manipulated by the entity to do this or simply applied his own cold logic of survival of the fittest against him. In either case, Evan eventually found a new master, one that he deemed much more worthy at that. The third take goes as follows. The horrific biddings that his father continuously sent him out to do wore out Evan's remaining mental health bit by bit. Eventually, this was too much. He couldn't live as someone's enforcer any longer. He killed Archie the way that he had grown accustomed to killing people, by trapping them, Archie broken underground. He then took off to wander aimlessly through the country, seeking freedom, perhaps. Eventually, the entity took interest in his potential and reached out her long fingers. But as in the first scenario, she had miscalculated. Not in the same way though. And yes, the entity indeed seems to be a female of origin. We shall touch on that on a future video. Even was indeed not cooperative about going back to the old good times of melting people on Mondays and slicing some throats on Fridays. The reason this time, however, isn't the still burning loyalty towards his father, but simply a wish to finally be free. So the entity tortured the traumatized and lost Ivan Macmillan until he was no more. So, the question remains, which scenario took place during the dark times of the Macmillan estate? In my opinion, it can't be the first one. As much as I like it and would want to believe it, there are just enough loose ends to prove it inaccurate. The workers surely could have broken Archie's legs, as revealed in the Macmillan's phalanx bone, an item obtainable in the blood web. Macmillan's skeletal remains were found in the basement of the mine storehouse, his leg bones shattered into pieces and a mining hammer lying in his lap. So, miners could have done that, but the description of Macmillan estate realm reveals a handful of details which in my opinion crack the foundations of the scenario 1. First, and I quote, Archie Macmillan's starved remains were later found. If the miners were the killers, they surely would have known that Ivan was coming to check on his father shortly, and would have finished the kill right there, not left him to starve. On the other hand, trapping someone and letting them starve goes very well together with someone who is called the Trapper. Secondly, and so I quote, a silent skeleton with a taunting man-made grin upon his meatless skull. This is a gruesome detail, and even as mutinous miners surely would have been bitter of the fate that their fellow laborers were faced with, I do not believe they would have been capable of such a horrid deed. Not to mention that this detail obviously bears resemblance to the Trapper's mask, made of bone with man-made grin. Thirdly, the new Trapper cosmetic, Trapper Ornate Mask, reveals to us that Ivan had already taken to wearing the mask before he killed his father. So, it isn't the first one. What about the second one? Still, I say that no. Why? Because even as Ivan was a strong and capable man, he was still just a man. He could not have endured such torture that can be read from his appearance while he was still a mere mortal, not without some greater power denying him the mercy of death, which sounds very much like the way of the entity to me. Thus, the metal rotting fused with his very flesh, and ever so open wounds are not from his father, but from entity's torture. Still, I see no reason why the entity would have tortured him if he went willingly. So, it can't be the case too. And the third one remains. Let's summarize. Ivan did kill his father, apparently out of his own will. Severely traumatized and merely seeking for freedom, he didn't wish to become a slave of anyone ever again. Unfortunately, greater powers had already planned him a different fate. He suffered under entity's torture until his skin hardened, his torso was colored with unhealing scars, and the substance that his adult life was so much centered around, metal, was made a permanent part of him very self. So ends the tale of Ivan Macmillan, and begins the one which we call the Trapper. In conclusion, even as he was misguided and unjust in his first life, Ivan Macmillan became something far, far worse. The faceless killer, whose unrelenting loyalty now towards the entity, an even more wicked master than ever before, drives his every stride, his terrifying mask chuckling from your agony in the dark. The few places which held hope for the survivor's flight now become choke points for him to harvest his prey. Watch your step out there. That's my tale on the Trapper. I know that there are still great many details of the story covered in the fog, but take this as my educated guess. Do keep in mind that I am merely retelling and breathing life to these stories, and we cannot forget to credit the masterful minds who created all this in the first place, the awesome men and women at Behavior Interactive. Not to mention that my research would have taken ages without the vivid lore community of this game. Their discussions, even heated at times, and theories were an immeasurable source of trivia and inspiration, and without them, this video would have never seen daylight. I leave some articles that I found most useful in the description. If you found this interesting, I definitely recommend them for you. And any questions you might have, I will gladly answer to the best of my capability. At the end of the day, remember, that isn't the most charming part of any story, the part that keeps us coming back, time after time again, that they are always alive and never quite complete. Next time we shall try to take a glimpse at an invisible man, haunting the landscape of a past trauma, a bloodbath of metal and treason. Until then, I shall see you soonest.